Hello, hello. This is the My Artifact episode number 3695. Today's date is November 10, 2025. It's been almost like a night at 10:08, 10:02 p.m. All right, let's just jump into the question. All right, let's go. The question is, what if morality was determined by nature? Oh, that is a really good question. All right, first of all, what exactly is this question and why am I asking this question to myself? This is what if question. Why am I asking this question to myself? What if question is always really interested way to give the answer. It kind of like a force you to think about that reality. When I try to think about that reality, when I try to construct that reality, it kind of like a really required my knowledge, experience, what I've been through and things like that. And I'm just giving my opinion regarding about that reality. Disclaimer, the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right or is not exactly wrong either. It is just my opinion. It's raw, it's unfiltered, it is my opinion, and opinion are subjective according to the people. Alright, now let's proceed further. Now regarding about the question says that what if morality was determined by the nature? Now before you need to give any kind of like answer about this question, you need to understand this question first. What is exactly morality? What exactly is this thing? A morality means like that ki what we consider right or wrong, good or bad. Okay, like stealing money is good or bad? Obviously it's bad. Okay, yeah. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, our moral value, it comes from the experience, it comes from the surrounding, it comes from books and things like that. Now basically we are living in this modern world where everyone are little bit moral values are equivalently same. Okay, like equivalently same means what? Like if I'm gonna say stealing money, right or wrong? Wrong. Killing people, right or wrong? Wrong. Drinking too much alcohol, right or wrong? Wrong. Creating pollution, right or wrong? Yeah, wrong, but sometimes we don't really have a choice, so we do kind of like a pollution, but still it's a wrong. Okay, yeah, like whatever the way it's supposed to be, we'll try to make sure that we'll have little less pollution. Okay, but still is this thing that key doing pollution is wrong. Okay, killing animal, right or wrong? Wrong. Okay, saying mean thing to someone else, to kind of like your friend or things like that, is it right or wrong? When you say this thing in a fun way, that is okay, but kind of like a simply when you do this thing on purposely, that is wrong. Okay, yeah. So but like a kind of like a saying mean thing to someone else is wrong. Okay, yeah. So what I'm trying to tell you is this thing, our moral value are somewhat something kind of like a similar, because we are living in this modern world and we are kind of like something literally have similar moral values regarding about things and that, like almost not exactly similar but somewhat kind of like yeah. But if I'm gonna say that key almost like 100 years ago or maybe like a 500 years ago, these moral values are kind of like very much different. Why? Because let's just say 500 years ago, things are very much different. At that time, our moral values kind of like very much different. Like let's just say killing somebody. Okay, yeah. Now if I'm gonna say killing somebody is right or wrong, well probably I might gonna say right. Why? Because it's very common at that time. Okay, yeah. Like basically if I wanted to conquer another country, or if I wanted to expand my boundaries, expand my kind of like new territory or things like that, so there is only one option to do, is kill the people, right? Yeah. So at that time moral value was kind of like a very much different, right? So do you understand moral value? Okay, kind of like consider as what is actually right or what is actually wrong. Now the question is that key, what if morality was determined by nature? All right, so our moral value is actually comes from kind of like experience and things like that, right? What if that moral values actually come from kind of like a nature? Then what would be that world? If our moral value is comes from the nature, if the moral value is actually comes from the nature, then how is exactly different from our moral value? What exactly is this thing? Well, probably is this thing that key, is it actually possible that key the moral value is kind of like a something determined by the nature? Is it exactly, is it like what exactly like? Okay, yeah. If you still not really understand, I'm gonna try to explain this question as simple as possible as we can. Okay, yeah. Because if I'm gonna say it's a very simple thing, what is exactly right and wrong? But okay, yeah. So you have this kind of like a moral value inside of you regarding about something like a what is actually right, what is actually wrong, what is actually good, what is actually bad. Okay, yeah. You have kind of like a complete category regarding about what is actually right or wrong and things like that. Okay. Now these are values where it actually came from. It actually came from your surrounding. It actually came from your experience. It actually came from the books and kind of like a people, what they say and things like that. Right? Basically, is this thing what I'm trying to tell you, those moral values came from human, right? Yeah, is actually came from human. Like basically is this thing that a dog is not teaching us a moral value, or kind of like some sort of animal is not kind of like a came and kind of like a saying, no, your moral value is this and that and that. Right? No, like basically is this thing, our moral value is actually comes from the people. Yeah, it's not actually come from kind of like a random animal or things or that or that. Okay, yeah. Now basically is this thing, if not random animal but nature kind of like a giving you moral value, then what would be that particular world? What exactly is this thing? Is the nature is kind of like a somebody giving the moral value. Now if I'm gonna say, if one species is actually giving a moral value to another species, then what would be that world? Okay, what would be that world? If you are kind of like a thinking about very like okay, let me give you context. Okay, yeah. You have to understand this question a little bit further. Okay, yeah. If like basically whatever the moral value that you have right now, those are moral values actually comes from the people. Okay, do you agree or disagree? Agree? All right. Now proceed further. What if that moral values is actually comes from someone else, and that someone else is not human? Then what is at least this thing? What would be that particular world? If you are very hard to imagine what would be that particular world, now I'm giving you context. Okay, religious. Okay, yeah. In religious is a kind of like a things that a particular religious has a different kind of like a god. Okay, yeah. Now different kind of like a simply god is kind of like a giving you different moral values. Okay, yeah. Now different moral values. Well, what is that different moral value? What exactly is this thing? Okay, yeah. A different moral value means like that let's just say donation. Okay, yeah, donation. Like every religion is a kind of like somebody ask for donation. Okay, yeah, like you have to be kind of like somebody donate and things and that and that. Okay. Now basically like let me tell you one thing. Okay, let's try to compare the NGO. Okay, yeah, and there is a kind of like a religious trust. Okay, religious trust kind of like a things. What is actually religious trust? Means like that there is a kind of like a temple. The people who kind of like running that temple, the people who kind of like running that temple, those temple people called trusty people probably. I'm not really sure about that. And there is a NGO. Okay, NGO is a kind of like a solely non-profit organization. They are kind of like a somebody doing the work for the people. Okay, not profit organization. Like basically is this thing that ki NGO, there are multiple NGOs. Okay, let's just say that ki women's safety NGOs in India, there are a lot of NGOs that actually exist and things like that. Okay, now why am I comparing both? Okay, because of that ki both kind of like assembly things like a NGO and the religious trust are kind of like assembly giving a particular moral values. Okay, yeah, moral values regarding about, let's just say there is a NGO regarding about the driving safety. Okay, yeah, like basically this is kind of like some NGO is kind of like assembly doing advertisement things or kind of like making sure that driving safety is kind of like assembly very essential and things and that and that. Okay, now religious trust is kind of like a giving the kind of like a simply complete entire like a things like a such a moral value kind of like a simply giving that what would be our life and things and that, which is completely different, right? Completely different. But the main purpose is that make the people life better, right? Yeah, like basically is this thing the religious kind of like a some way to be a spiritual to make the people life better. NGO is a kind of like a somebody make the people life better by kind of like a somebody doing this activity or kind of like a somebody awareness or things like that. Okay, now if I'm gonna say both things run on donation. Okay, yeah, like basically NGOs they are kind of like a somebody, if they kind of like a getting donation, they are kind of like a doing their work, they are kind of like spreading the awareness and things and that. Okay, and now religious are also kind of like a somebody work on donation too, like people who kind of like a somebody the spiritual kind of like a somebody um, devotees or things like that, they would come, they would kind of like a donate something. Now let me give you perspective. Okay, what I'm trying to tell you is this thing that key usually donation like the religious trust get too much donation than NGOs. Why is that thing? Why is that? Is because of that ki religious are a kind of like a something a universal way of communication to God. Okay, yeah, to kind of like make our life better. Like how does universal like what it's okay? How what is this thing? Okay, yeah. Okay, you are believe in your God and you wanted to pray for God to make your life better. Okay, yeah. So basically you do this thing, you kind of like started praying and things like that. Doesn't really matter where you are, what you are. If you wanted to make sure that key you wanted to go to that temple and kind of like do this thing, you can do that thing to kind of like make your life better. Okay, yeah. Now may I able to do this thing with NGOs? Like basically, can I kind of like actually make my life better to so that I would go to the NGOs and kind of like making sure my life would be better? Am I able to do that thing in NGOs? No, I can't. Okay, yeah. like basically, how do I supposed to kind of like assembly NGO will kind of like assembly make my life better? Probably they are kind of like doing your life better, but in very indirect way. Okay, yeah. A kind of like assembly being awareness of driving safety and things and that, so that you might not get killed by the driving and things like that, probably. Okay, so what exactly is this thing? What is exactly what I'm trying to tell you? Why am I kind of like assembly giving this example in this particular moral thing? Okay, in the first scenario that I mentioned, that key the moral value that you are that you have is because of the people. Okay, yeah. But when you get moral values from kind of like somebody such a people like a such a thing from like a such a thing that cannot not a kind of like a something people like a god or things like that, then the morality would be changed. Now, okay, it's very hard to explain this thing, but have you ever kind of like noticed the religious spiritual thing? Religious spiritual thing. Okay, yeah. Now, basically, if you are from US and Europe, you might not seen that particular religious and spiritual kind of like a thing. Now, what is at least religious and spiritual kind of like a thing? Like, I'm living in India. Okay, yeah. And in India, religious are very big factor. Okay, yeah. And there are so many kind of like some religious things that look very weird and look very kind of like somebody that keep very different. Okay, let's just say I seen kind of like some people who are kind of like somebody dancing, but the dance is not the way that you kind of like imagine. A kind of like a thing that the the god is actually came into her that body into that body, and kind of like somebody she celebrate that ki god soul is actually came to my body, so she's actually dancing, and she dancing very weirdly, like she like she kind of like remove her hair, and she just kind of like I don't know how she, yeah, it's very weird thing. Okay, yeah. like um um like basically we are living in modern world, so basically that religious and spiritual thing is very less exist. Yeah, probably it are exist, but I seen them in kind of like some sort of television or things or that, or maybe kind of like in YouTube videos, but in reality I just seen one or twice. Okay, yeah. If you are living in US, Europe, you might not seen anything at all, because in your country there is not no exist at all. Okay, yeah. But in specifically in India there is too much. And obviously also, if you went back like basically 500 year before, then those spiritual things are kind of like a too much. Okay, yeah. Now what exactly is this thing, what is exactly that spiritual things? Okay, yeah. um okay I kind of like a couple of months ago I was kind of like reading a Bible. Okay, yeah. Now now basically this thing also, the information that I'm trying to tell you is not exactly right, it's not exactly wrong either. I just read that thing, I'm not really sure, but I'm just trying to explain. Okay, yeah. In the Bible, if if a kind of like a something let's just say if a woman, okay, yeah, unmarried woman is had a sex with someone else, okay, yeah, with random person, okay, yeah. So she became a kind of like a something um 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 a pavitra, what is exactly apavitra in English, I'm not really sure. Unholy, yeah. She became unholy. Okay, yeah. So there is a particular procedure to to become holy. Okay, to become kind of like a somebody that she became holy. Holy means like she became a kind of like a somebody pavitra, things like that. Now, uh, I read that procedure to become that holy, to become that kind of like some holiness, and that procedure is like very like a very wrong like in today's standard point of perspective. And in that point of like basically 500 years ago, these are very much common. Like what is exactly that procedure? In that particular procedure says that you have to be um, um, offer a god some sort of thing. Okay, yeah. And what is exactly that thing? You have to be offer kind of like somebody a meat, a goat, or kind of like a ram, or yeah, like yeah, chicken or things like that. Okay, yeah. um then if you have to if you have kind of like a money, then kind of like a somebody that spend that money, offer that money to a god. Okay, yeah. If you don't really have money, then you have to be served for kind of like a couple of year for god. Okay, yeah. And and basically is this thing, and then and only then, like there are multiple procedure, by the way. Okay, I'm not going into the detail, like there are so many procedure regarding about how to become a kind of like unholy things, and that i I don't want to go to it, like it's kind of like only so much boy. Okay, yeah. But it is like and yeah, so these kind of like a things. what exactly what I'm trying to tell you is this thing. Now, when that particular woman had a sex, it's not like basically she basically kind of like had sex with someone else. Like she didn't really want to, but kind of like somebody is this thing. At that time, rape was very much common. Okay, like basically is this thing in today's world, rape are very much like a criminal activity. Okay, yeah. 500 years ago, these are very much common. Like people kind of like came and kind of like do the rape and things like that. Okay, yeah. So basically, this is kind of like a woman is kind of like these things happened. Okay, yeah. Like basically, but still she kind of like taking all the blame because some guys kind of like rape her, and she kind of like somebody following such a moral value that kind of like crippled her life. Okay, crippled her life. Like she is actually serving for God for kind of like somebody God not how many years or maybe entire life or things or that. I don't know. Like ritual. Those are like some of the kind of like somebody religious ritual things are so crazy. So crazy. I'm not talking about just a Christianity. I'm talking about the like I'm belong to the India, by the way. In India, there are fucked up kind of like rituality and still exist, by the way. And just like basically this thing when I try to hurt that thing now, I was like, dude, what exactly their moral values, dude? What exactly is this thing? Like they are doing this thing with their own child, with own things. Just my God, like legitly, it's a when I kind of like basically like you heard some of the stories. If you not really heard, probably I don't know, yeah, dude. It's just like that. It's completely subjective regarding about where you are from, what is exactly your surrounding and things like that. Okay, yeah. If you don't really heard any kind of like some religious rituals and things like that, probably you have to be go to the YouTube and search about religious ritual stories in all over the world and things and that and when you kind of like heard that stories, you realize that there is no moral value, nothing really at all, because in that particular stories they are kind of like doing such a thing completely against the moral values, completely against. Okay, yeah. And it felt like wrong. It felt really wrong. Okay, yeah. So what is exactly my point? What my point is that key in today's point of perspective, we have kind of like a category of moral values. What exactly is this thing? What is exactly right and what is exactly wrong and things like that. But if you kind of like assembly nature decide that ki what is exactly the moral values, then probably those moral values are kind of like such a moral value that give advantage to them, give advantage to the nature. Okay, yeah. Okay. It's a very hard to explain, but let me give you context. Okay, let me give you context. If okay, there is a mother nature who kind of like speak with us. Okay, let's just say there is a tree. Okay, and if the tree kind of like somebody speak with us, and they kind of like somebody give you life and things and that, and the trees are kind of like somebody give you a moral values. Okay, yeah. Now those moral value are kind of like such a moral value that like they are kind of like give us such a moral value. In that particular moral value, we have to follow some sort of procedure to do such a thing to add advantage to the trees. Okay, yeah, to the add advantage to the trees. Now it's a very hard and weird to say, but let's just give the context. Okay, let's just okay, yeah. So you like basically have you seen trees? Obviously you okay, yeah. Trees require water, okay, to grow and things like that. When did you last time you kind of like assembly do this kind of like a giving the water to the trees and things like that? Have you ever remember? If you are kind of like a love the gardening, probably you are doing this every single day. Okay, yeah. But if you are not, you never really did any kind of like some water into them, right? Yeah. If the nature is kind of like a giving moral value to us, then probably is this thing they would kind of like speak with us and say that you have to give me water every single day. you have to be kind of like a put me into the kind of like a sunlight every single day. Okay, yeah. Also is this thing that ki do not cut me, or do not kind of like a simply cut my fruits or things like that. Okay, yeah. Or like basically is this thing that if the nature is kind of like simply giving you moral values, then basically those moral values are kind of like a simply that key giving advantage to the nature. Okay, yeah. No, basically there is no wrong in that, na? Like basically nature is a kind of like a somewhat something really essential, right? Yeah, that is definitely true. But like let me give you the context. Okay, let me give you the thing. Okay, yeah. The growth of human happened, like the growth of the humanity is actually happened is because of that we are started thinking about our point of perspective. We became selfish, and we kind of like assembly build the cities and kind of like assembly building and things and that, and for that particular purpose we've kind of like cut down the trees. Okay, yeah. Now basically what I'm trying to tell you is this thing: if the nature is kind of like giving us moral value, would you believe that nature is kind of like giving such an instruction that they should supposed to be cut them and kind of like build the city or kind of like things or that? No, definitely not, right? Because every species on the planet are try to save us. Like basically trees are also wanted to save them first. Okay, yeah. Obviously trees are cannot speak, but like basically just like take any species. Okay, let's just say you have a dog. Okay, yeah. And kind of like somebody try to do action that you are trying to hit the dog. Dog is kind of like a try to save himself from you. Okay, yeah. And not just dog, take a cat, take any species. Every species are try to save his body from that particular person that attack us and things like that. Now basically is this thing that the trees are also try to save them, but they can't do that thing because obviously is this thing they can't move, they can't do anything at all. They are kind of like very vulnerable regarding about everything. Okay, yeah. So basically is this thing: if the nature is kind of like giving us a moral value, means like that they kind of like restrict us to kind of like only not to cut the trees. They restrict us to not to cut the fruit from their trees. They restrict us to not take kind of like any advantage from us or things like that. So when this thing actually happened, then probably is this thing that the humanity might not gonna survive or might not gonna grow that much. Okay, do you understand what I'm trying to tell you? Okay, yeah. It's very hard to explain, but it's not really that hard. You just have to understand a little bit regarding about a possible perspective. Okay, yeah. So let me give you context. Morality that you have is actually comes from the people. It comes from the human species, and those morality are kind of like such a morality that lead us to grow, lead us to kind of like somebody became better. Okay, yeah. Now if I'm gonna say, if the kind of like somebody a dog has a kind of like a moral values, then what would be that dog's moral value? Dog might be considered as a like basically be a friend of human, so that you will kind of like get the food and things like that. So dogs are always try to get a friend with the human and things like that. Okay, so this is what it is. This is what kind of like that's what I'm trying to tell you. If the nature is kind of like somebody giving us the moral value, then probably is this thing that we might not cut the tree, we might not cut the fruit. Probably is this thing we would gonna kind of like somebody breathe the oxygen, which is okay, but still is this thing that most of the innovation of the human growth is actually comes from the cutting the tree and kind of like make some sort of equipment like simply weapons or things or that. Okay. So yeah, but still is this thing, it's just my opinion. It's a very very vague one, very unpredictable possibility probably. I'm not really sure my answer is exactly right, but it's just my opinion regarding about the kind of like if the morality was determined by the nature and things like that. Whatever. This is it. I should supposed to be end here. And thank you.